Unconditional love doesn't exist. There is a profound level of enlightenment and growth that one must move through to be able to love without conditions.
With unconditional love, really the ability to experience that in our human experience, then really the unconditionality of the love first starts from self.
Non-monogamy and monogamy are essentially not different. And they're not different because they want the same thing.
At the end of the day, the vehicle and the expression is simply an expression for us to integrate various data codes that we want to experience. But the most important aspect is the intention behind that decision and behind that expression. All right. Today on this episode, we've got an amazing guest, Stefanos, with us. Essentially, he's a relationship expert and he's been at this personal development industry for almost 4 years now. Yeah, proper. Yeah, and he's worked with so many different diverse thought leaders and leaders around the world, specifically focusing on the masculine and feminine energetics, as well as really understanding how relationships unravel and unfold, especially in these modern times with so many different dissonance and distractions externally. Like, how can we actually create a divine union in truth with who we are? And some of the people that you've worked with include Olympic gold medalists, elite championship wrestlers, like different amazing people from different walks of life.
Yeah. I've been very, very blessed to work with many high performers, CEOs, special operations guys, gold medalists, elite fighters, world champion fighters. It's very interesting to have worked with such a broad and deep range of people, especially sort of at the edges of mindset and at the edges of performance.
Yeah, and that's phenomenal because especially when it comes to human psychology and how we relate to one another, like there are so many different expressions of our careers, our professions, and who we are as a dad, who we are as a son. And for you to experience these different facets of life in terms of its data codes, I'm curious, like, what got you into this scene? Like, what was the inspiration? How did this even happen for you?
Yeah, my desire to understand people and the mind and pain and trauma and performance and how it's all interweaved and interconnected, including the quality of the relationship to the things that matter most to us. Really stemmed from my childhood, and it stemmed from not only an insatiable curiosity for life and human psychology and human potential, but also just feeling that I was living life at a deficit. I grew up in a very violent, aberrant, uncertain, volatile household, and it caused me to really retract in life, and that caused me then to ask very deep, meaningful, existential questions as I became older. I was very empathic when I was younger and could really feel a lot of my environment, but didn't understand it. And so the pursuit of wanting to understand got me into the field that I was in. And it's interesting, most things come full circle.
Yeah.
Not that I think that I understand everything now. I definitely don't. However, I place a greater focus on feeling as opposed to understanding and being with the sensations of what my body is receiving from the environment, and then looking to understand and connect and be cognitive and intellectual with that thing and with that experience later, as opposed to that being my primary driver.
Yeah, that's so intriguing, right? Like how much our childhood and our family background really influences the path that we get to be on. Because I know my representational system, it's primarily visual and then kinesthetic. So it looks good, it feels good, and then I act on it. So when I was young, I had so many like anger management issues because I couldn't understand my emotions, and yet they were so real. So in your perspective, like with what you've experienced, when it comes to perhaps ancestral patterns, perhaps borrowed beliefs from your childhood, how have those conditioning really influenced the people you have worked with, and perhaps even for yourself when it comes to relationships?
I've been to some very dark places within my own psychology and within the path, the individuated path that I've walked on. And I've managed to move through that darkness and that fear and that shadow of the human psyche, of my own psyche. And I've been able to face my trauma and my shame and my pain and not only live through it, but be able to shift the trajectory of where my life was going. And because I've done that multiple times in my life, I've been willing to do that. And to be honest, for so much of my life, I was very unwilling to do any of that. Yeah. Hence why I found myself in continuously painful situations. But as I really started to continue to face my stuff, as I do now as well, it's not like I live this perfect life or this stress-free life or challenge-free life, not at all. The way I deal with challenge and difficulty now, there's a greater willingness to really be with it and to really sit with it and to accept it and to work through it and to make changes, whereas before I didn't want to know any of it.
Yeah.
And so because I've gone to these really dark places and have come back from that, how the people that I work with see me and feel me through their own neuroception, through their own nervous systems, is very different to how once upon a time they would have received me. There's greater levels of integrity that move through me because I've just been to those places. It's like, I used to own CrossFit gyms many years ago, and I couldn't really teach someone how to squat. This isn't completely true, but I couldn't really teach someone how to squat, for example, if I couldn't execute a squat myself. Now, of course, it's not completely true because I can still understand the mechanics of a squat, but I may be mechanically hindered. But I wasn't mechanically hindered, therefore I was able to do it as well. So I wouldn't put them through a very arduous, strenuous workout if I hadn't gone through a similar painful experience myself. So it's this relatability. I guess in short, what I'm really saying is there's a level of relatability that is felt in the people that I work with because of the places that I've gone to and because of the places that they're willing to go to as well. It's like, oh, you've been somewhere that feels very unfamiliar to me, but that I want to make familiar. I'm grateful to be on this journey with you, as I'm grateful to be on this journey with them as well, because, there's never once in my career or my life where I'm working with a client and I'm the coach or the teacher or whatever, and I think I'm not the student. I'm constantly learning and growing in every situation. I feel humbled in every client relationship I have. I learn from my clients. They help me be a better guide and mentor and leader. I do not take that for granted at all. There's often just so much more learning and growth that takes place, especially if we're open to it. And, I've just been humbled enough in my life because my ego was so big, because I was living from fear and hyper selfishness, and because I was living from repressed and unresolved trauma, that they're really, I do my best to not be arrogant, to think, oh, I know it all, or I've got all the tools, and definitely not, man. I want to humble myself as a student as often as I can.
Yeah, I hear you on that, because that's the thing, what I've come to realize working with clients as well. It's that at the end of the day, it's almost like a co-creation process. Like you've got to honor the sacredness and the sanctity of the connection and why we are, in this process of working together and transcending in various ways. Like allowing yourself to be in that position of continual learning is so important, especially when it comes to the transformational space, which brings me back to this very intriguing thought process. Like most people that I've had conversations with, and they got into this work of like education, of like mentoring, of guidance, a lot of it came from a specific potential like huge divine awakening, event or situation. Was there one in your life that perhaps woke you up to, or activated true perception for you and woke you up to what is actually real in this life?
Yes. Many years ago, over a decade, my partner at the time discovered my infidelity, and it was radical infidelity. It was very intense infidelity in terms of quantity.
Right.
And all of that was a coping strategy for me to deal with the stuff that I wasn't willing to look at. And I was caught in such a fear trap and a selfish way of being that, I was of the belief that what someone doesn't know doesn't hurt them. And normal, people cheat in relationship and people live their own lives outside of relationship. I had very misconstrued values, and I was very good at convincing myself that that was okay and that was justifiable. However, I was living way out of integrity. And that particular moment, and there were a few before that, but very different to this one, that particular moment really shocked me out of my patterns and into shame spiral and into really addressing a lot of my trauma and seeing the hurt that I'd caused, my actions had caused this wonderful human being that didn't deserve to be lied to.
Yeah.
And that was really the I don't want to say the catalyst, but one of the greater catalysts in my life for eliciting deeper transformation.
Yeah, makes sense. It was very similar in my situation. Like I entered into a relationship with a beautiful woman, 9 years older than me. And I remember I entered into the relationship lying about who I was, who I am, because I had this need to feel good enough to be a certain specific idea of a man for her. And it was through that unraveling process and through that mirror that was so beautiful that I began to really see myself for the truth of who I am. And it was when I began to shed those masks that I began to wake up to begin to connect to unconditional love even. So the question would be like, when it comes to unconditional love as a concept, as an embodiment, because I used to not believe in love. I used to believe that, love is just this thing that everyone does, blah, blah, blah. It's not like a real thing. What is the typical quintessential journey that most souls and individuals go through from potentially coming from their background as is and connecting to, true embodiment of love in its unconditionality?
Does unconditional love actually exist? Maybe it doesn't. So maybe in this human form, in this 3D expression, unconditional love doesn't exist. And there is a profound level of enlightenment and growth that one must move through to be able to love without conditions. We often hear this when someone encounters a psychedelic journey or a deep somatic experience or a trauma release practice, or, they're able to collapse duality and move into this sense of oneness. And in that space, that's where they realize that love is deeply unconditional.
Yeah.
And until then, and even if that's not maintainable, we come back into conditions. Now, here's the thing though, conditions aren't bad. It's how we apply those conditions and exert those boundaries in our world that really matters. Because you can still say, I love you, and for us to be in this relationship, these are my requests and needs. If you're being abusive, if you're shouting, if you're neglecting, it's not that I'm going to quote unquote stop loving you. Yeah. It's that loving you in this dynamic, in this container, in the way this is happening right now, can't continue. And so we get to play in this realm of, I can still love you and I don't want to be with you, or I don't want to be in your presence when this behavior is playing out. That's being boundaried. And I love myself enough and I love you enough to not perpetuate that behavior and not allow that to continue. So I think love in this human expression at some level is conditional, and I don't think conditionality is a bad thing or a negative thing. And by conditions, I mean love is not enough. And with great love comes great risk and great hurt and great joy and great all the things.
All the things, yeah.
And so with that said, we have a tremendous opportunity to love as deep as we can and be as non-attached as we can, and learn to love ourselves enough to say no to the things that no longer serve us. And that doesn't necessarily mean you love that person less. It just means you have to love them differently. The expression of love towards them and with them needs to shift if you're going to honor yourself. And that's what being in this human form is about. It's about looking at all the variables. It's about assessing all the stakeholders, and not in an intellectual or even logical or rational way. It can be done through the feeling body.
Intuitive. Yeah.
And so, for me, love is really being as often as we can out of the energetic of fear, which is a very low frequency. And love is of course a lot higher than that.
So would you say then that, because with unconditional love, really the ability to experience that in our human experience, in terms of our expressions, in terms of our boundaries, in terms of choosing us and our truth at every moment, every choice, in order for us to experience life in its fullest, then really the unconditionality of the love first starts from self.
Yes, that's another one that's very interesting as well, right? You don't have to love yourself first to let love in. And I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Yes, self-love is crucial. Otherwise, it becomes deeply challenging to receive.
Yeah.
We won't allow it if we don't love ourselves and if we don't care for ourselves and if we're not in any level of decency and self-worth and esteem. However, we're relational beings, and in our pursuit, if you like, or embodiment of love, when we are struggling to love the parts of ourselves that we believe are unlovable, and someone comes along and loves those parts and is able to penetrate our hearts, the love from quote unquote outside of ourselves has entered us and allowed us to quote unquote love ourselves. Now we have to be at a certain point of openness to be able to receive that. If we're completely closed and locked in, no matter what's outside, you won't be able coming in, you won't be able to receive it and love yourself. So there has to be something there that you can access. But it's a delicate dance. It's not a black and white, rigid, hey, if you don't love yourself, you can't let love in. Not necessarily. It's far more complex than that.
Have you ever experienced potentially like a client of yours or an experience and someone came to you and you can feel the density of this person's energetic field and he or she is literally in a state of perpetual fear and literally cannot see the light when it comes to love itself? And if yes, what was the process that truly broke through that veil for them, like for most people in that state?
Most people live in fear. Most people do not love themselves enough. Most people don't care about themselves enough. Most people are walking around very hypervigilant, not trusting other people, not trusting themselves. They live in their pain bodies most of the time, if not all of the time, in either very subtle or very clear ways. And they deal with it by either psychologically suppressing and repressing or popping pills or avoidance strategies such as any ism, alcoholism, foodism, sexism meaning, addiction to sex, compulsion towards sex, any peak experiences that distract from feeling the very uncomfortable thing within. So one of the first things that I do, or that I am rather, when I'm working with people in that space is just be a safe space for them, be consistent in my behavior, be slow in my movement, be really open and curious, be non-judgmental and compassionate, and be consistent in all of that. And that slowly chips away. It slowly chips away at the rigidity of the fear, the harsh armor that's there. One plate falls off at a time, falls off at another time. And we begin to develop and build deep rapport and trust with each other. Our nervous systems need to feel safe. And one of the fastest ways to feel safe is, yes, through our own internal process, but we absorb so much from our environment. So if there is safety in our environment, we can adapt to that. We can pick that up. We can attune to that, if you like. And so one of the greatest things to do for anyone if they're feeling disconnected, fearful, in pain, is be a safe space for them to express, to vent without judgment, with compassion, with curiosity. Get to know them and be consistent in that practice, and it can make the world of difference for breaking that fear cycle.
Yeah, 100%. And based on your observations, because there are different ways of relating, right? Especially when it comes to your cultural backgrounds. And I know you've got experiences working with the East and also experiences working with the West. So based on your experience, when it comes to these different cultural expressions of relating, what are some of the differences that you have seen, and how have some of those differences lead to perhaps like more expensive outcomes here or different outcomes there in your experience?
Most people are looking for the same thing in terms of what they desire, and that is to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, understood, respected, appreciated. These are basic human needs, and you'll find that these needs are fairly consistent cross-culturally.
Makes sense.
It's difficult to, and this is just generalizing, but it's difficult to make blanket statements about quote unquote the East versus quote unquote the West. Russia would be considered the East, India would be considered the East, and they're very different cultures in how they deal with challenges and difficulty, interpersonal, relational challenges and difficulties. What I will say is that collectivist versus, maybe versus isn't the right term, but collectivist and individual cultures, there's quite a difference there. The collectivist cultures rely more on their immediate and extended family and community to move through different challenges, where the individualist cultures, such as the US, as an example, are more isolated. And you may find, and I haven't looked at clinical studies around this, not of late anyway, but you may find that there is more quote unquote depression and anxiety and these Western diagnoses in more of a individualistic society as opposed to a collectivist society. Even if you look at blue zones, one of the key factors that allows these centurions to live healthily beyond the age of 100 is, yes, it's food, it's environment, it's exercise, movement, and so forth, and some other factors. But a big part of it is the social cohesion found in these communities.
Yeah.
And the majority of these communities would be considered collectivist communities.
Right.
And so the point I'm making and I'm emphasizing here is the power of relationships, of quality relationships, of relationships that are nurturing and caring, and relationships that see you and know that my well-being is your well-being is my well-being. There's less separation and segregation. One could say it's closer to non-duality, if you like. It's closer to the Eastern mystic Advaita Vedanta, if you like. Yeah. And that, my friend, to me, that distinction is very important and very interesting.
Yeah, it's so interesting because have you heard of the Theosophical Society?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the pioneers when it comes to the integration of the East and the West spiritual philosophies. And what I've come to realize is that whenever people come together and they integrate their strengths and leverage their weaknesses, amazing things happen for the collective. It has never been like one side is better than the other. When both begins to choose to come together in various ways, things begin to unravel in the most beautiful and significant patterns of sorts. So when it comes to relating between the feminine and the masculine, of course, we understand that we have both within us. And whether you are in the LGBTQ community, there are also polarities at play in their relationships. What would you say are some of the most fundamental codes when it comes to perpetual intimacy? And how does it relate to a long-term relationship and commitment and devotion?
Safety is at the core of any intimate practice.
Yeah.
Safety is underpinned by consistency in behavior and also a devotion to one's inner work, a willingness to constantly grow and expand beyond limiting patterns, limiting beliefs, or just beliefs that are outdated or no longer serve you. A responsibility in dealing with our trauma or our pain. And this stuff can happen, or our psycho-emotional, psychosocial wounds. And this stuff can happen to us on a regular basis. I'm not just speaking to childhood wounds or early developmental wounds or experiences that we have that are very harsh or intense, that stay with us for decades unless we actively work through them. I'm speaking to, you may yesterday have been in a car accident. That's trauma. Yeah. You may have had an argument yesterday with a coworker that's really left you rattled. We've got to, this commitment to work on our stuff keeps clearing our channel, our psychological channel, our emotional channel, our spiritual and our physical channel. We're able to physiologically close the loop on trauma, which means that we are more regulated than we are dysregulated. Yeah. This lends itself to being a safe space for people to come to us, where we become less reactive, unconsciously less reactive, and we become more responsive and curious and compassionate, non-judgmental, and we can put firm boundaries up when we want to. That safety piece is important, but it's really underpinned by a commitment to doing our inner work.
Yeah, it's so important, hey? When it comes to the ability to lead ourselves through whatever process is coming up. Are there some practices that you engage on a daily, like whether it's in your daily life or weekly routines, that support you with the intimacy with your partner?
It's very important that I have stillness and silent time in my day, even if I have to get up super early early is all relative anyway, but if I have to get up earlier than my wife and my child get up to have that time, then that's really important to me. And that stillness practice, you can call it my meditation practice if you like. It's just being quiet when I'm in a conscious waking state where I'm not really quote unquote doing anything. Yeah. I'm not being productive if you like. Yeah. I'm just sort of being, right? Yeah. Physical self-care. So, cold immersion. I've been saunaing a lot more lately as well. I have this, I'm very lucky, I'm blessed. I have this in my garage. I have a sauna, infrared sauna and a cold plunge in my garage. So yeah, do that on a daily basis. That's very helpful for me. And exercise and movement is very helpful. So these self-care practices are important. In terms of with my wife, like the basic things, man, where I think basics, I was once told and shown that the elite are elite because they've mastered the basics. And that was very much in context to, martial artists, athletes, and soldiers, right? I'm like, okay, interesting. Well, where can I apply that philosophy in every area of my life? And so for my wife and I, the most simple thing we can do, this may sound really strange, but not strange, but just super simple, is we do our best to make sure we have time together, just her and I. So that's her and I and our daughter, of course, but just her and I. What we do in that time, it doesn't fucking matter. As long as we're interacting with, are we playing a board game? Are we kissing? Are we eye gazing? Are we walking and talking and visioning? Are we watching a movie? That's okay, but I prefer to be more interactive with each other. Like, are we playing a game or something? Are we planning an event, or what are we doing together? Are we working towards something? Are we working on a puzzle? It doesn't matter. But just, it's so important. And I notice when we don't do it because we're busy. Busy. things it affects the dynamic, man. It affects the dynamic, and it's uncomfortable, and it's impatient and abrasive, and we're short with each other because we're not having that time together. And it doesn't have to be every moment of every day.
Exactly.
But it just has to be deliberate. The deliberate piece is important.
And that's the thing. People think like creating intimacy and developing a long-term relationship is this whole complex, oh my God, I need like a secret code, blah, blah, blah. It's just like crazy, right? But really the ultimate simplicity is the ultimate truth, the ability to just choose at any moment. And especially as both of you are business owners, time is such a valuable resource. So the ability to choose and connect in that way, it's so beautiful in and of itself. And I remember a quote from Robin Sharma, and he said this: legendary performers practice being spectacular for so long that they no longer remember how to behave in non-spectacular ways, right? And most people find it the most challenging to get started, but it's the momentum that really takes things forward in various ways. And I'm curious then, when it comes to sex itself specifically, when it comes to testosterone levels for the man, because some people perhaps they get lost in their day-to-day, and then maybe they lose their sex drives in various ways, or maybe they're feeling a sense of fear or like stress or whatever, and then it prevents them from actually experiencing sex on an expansive level. So based on your understanding of who you've worked with and perhaps even in your daily life, when it comes to frequency of sex, what have you seen to be the most expansive, and what have you seen to be like literally on the precipice of an issue?
Too much ejaculation is not good for you. In Taoist traditions, and in various Eastern and Egyptian traditions as well, it's recommended that we as men don't ejaculate too often. Now, orgasm and ejaculation are very different. We don't ejaculate too often. To answer your question, you can have sex as much as you want, but just don't ejaculate often. Maybe once a month. Be very deliberate with how you do that, right? And what that means for you. And that's another conversation about being deliberate and intentional with it. But when we ejaculate, what the Eastern mystics say is that we're losing life force and life essence. And once it leaves us, right? It's like when brain cells die, they die, sort of thing. That's the current scientific understanding of that, right? And obviously, as we lose brain cells, there's parts of us that are being diminished. Now, when we're releasing ejaculate, it's a sacred seed. It really is life-giving in so many different ways, right? And so we have to learn to be intentional with that from a spiritual perspective. And from a physiological perspective, testosterone plummets after we ejaculate. Not necessarily after we have sex, after we ejaculate, but we can learn to non-ejaculatory orgasm can be very powerful. And getting into that practice and learning how to do that through breath techniques, through other specific techniques as well, we can learn to keep that energy circulating through our bodies. And now all of a sudden lovemaking and sex become more this spiritual practice and becomes this esoteric practice as well as this deeply physical practice as well. And the orgasm that you can receive from non-ejaculatory orgasm can be so much more pleasurable per se than ejaculatory orgasm. But we've got to learn how to do it. We've got to break the belief and the stigma that's associated with again, this is so complex, but men, all they want to do generally in the masculine, they want to complete, they want to finish, right? So when it comes to orgasm, we have to ejaculate. That's the finish, that's the completion. And then we feel quote unquote complete. Now we feel accomplished and we've achieved something.
Yeah, right.
We've got to break and shift those paradigms.
Yeah, so intriguing because a lot of the conversations and some of the conversations I've had with women is that when I begin to shed light on this through various conversations, they begin to realize that, oh wow, some of the sexual experiences that they've had, perhaps sometimes with their partner or like, intimate experiences, is that a lot of the times the once the man is done, he's done. And that's all he's looking to achieve in various ways. So, for example, like there will be some people who are watching this and they're like, non-ejaculatory orgasm, is that even a thing? Like, what is that? Yeah, what is that mystical experience that we're all talking about on a spiritual level? What do you have to say to them to even get started or even potentially just explore?
So if non-ejaculatory orgasm scares you or it's just super unfamiliar, start this way. Start practicing intimacy, okay, physical intimacy with your partner without the intention to even orgasm. Just think about that. So that could look like massaging each other. So it doesn't have to lead to even penetration. It doesn't have to lead to a completion. The completion is you let it wait. Instead of having this peak experience that raises, you have this experience that's just steady, and slowly completes itself naturally and organically. Start in that place. See how that feels. At the beginning, it's going to feel probably frustrating and very strange because you're going to feel like you've got pent up energy and you've got to release something. Yeah. There's some truth to that, but it's also a lot of conditioning, physical and mental and societal conditioning. So begin with something called 𝗶𝗶𝘆, which is, again, non-penetrative or at least non-ejaculatory, I should say, non-traditionally orgasmic lovemaking. And there are so many different things that you can do. It's not just massaging your partner as an example. There's eye gazing. There's laying and holding each other and breathing in very specific ways. We have to increase our range of finding how to be physically intimate outside of just sexual penetration.
Yeah.
That's where it begins.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many different ways and expressions of how sexual intimacy can be experienced, whether it's through play, whether it's through like day-to-day flirting, like so many different aspects. Which brings me to a very intriguing question that I would love to ask. Polygamy and monogamy. What are your perceptions of men choosing polygamy? And can polygamy be something one experiences for the rest of their life to experience true intimacy, divine union, and a depth of relationship for their soul's fulfillment?
Non-monogamy and monogamy are essentially not different. And they're not different because they want the same thing. They want to experience joy and pleasure and love and union and commitment in their own expressive ways. They want to experience intimacy and closeness and to feel safe and to feel held and understood and all those things, right? Can you find depth in connection and love and commitment, etc., in non-monogamy? Sure, you can. It's less about the vehicle and the container structure and more about the intention and how you bring yourself to that container and the agreements that you have and the willingness that you hold to do your inner work and what's your come from. If you're hiding in non-monogamy, if you're in polyamory or non-monogamy and you're hiding, in other words, when something becomes difficult with your primary partner or one of your partners, it's very easy to go to another partner and distract yourself dealing with that pain or dealing with that challenge that's arising in that particular area of the relationship, then you're using non-monogamy as a convenient excuse to run from your stuff. Yeah. If it's coming from a very different place, then it's a very different reasoning, right? Yeah. And it's the same with monogamy. If you're scared to ask for what you really, really want, and so you're just looking for trust and security in this one person, you're hyper codependent, that's not necessarily healthy either. So our come from very much matters when we're choosing the relationship styles we want to be immersed in.
Yeah, so that's a really powerful point, is that at the end of the day, the vehicle and the expression isn't like, it's simply an expression for us to integrate various data codes that we want to experience. But the most important aspect is the intention behind that decision and behind that expression, which is so fundamental because so many people in the world, they get distracted by the expression. They get distracted by the vehicle, like very symptomatic in nature, that they fail to actually perhaps even look at the root cause of why they're choosing that in the first place, right? And that's so fundamental when it comes to relating. So in your perception, if you potentially maybe write a manual or like a codex for experiencing deep, connected, intimate relationships in every facet of your life, what are the three top things that's extremely essential when it comes to profound relationships?
Top three things for any epic relationship. Do your inner work. In other words, be responsible for your side of the road. Take ownership of when you make mistakes or choices that hurt you or hurt someone else. Be responsible and sovereign and autonomous for your own growth, your own personal growth, right? And really bring that value of growth to the relationship. Not to impose values on anyone, but growth, I think, is something that it's our birthright as human beings. A couple that play together last longer as well. So play, like really, really play in your relationship. Really, really play in your relationship. And then third one would be willingness, right? And by the way, let me go back to play. Play includes sexuality, having fun, novelty, variety in all the different forms, working together, playing together, achieving together, celebrating together, all of that. And then willingness would be the third one, like be willing to have challenging, difficult conversations. And part of willingness is honesty. You can't be willing without honesty and integrity in your honesty and truth telling. So those would be three. I don't know if they're my top three, but those are three really powerful elements and intentions to bring to a relationship that can not necessarily guarantee success, but heighten the experience and the quality of the experience of intimate relating.
Exactly. So profound in and of itself. I'm curious with the relationships that you have experienced, whether it's platonic, business, intimate, like they're all different expressions of relating, right? Because I've always determined you, because people talk about like, there's a certain, the top three things that people focus on in terms of what they want to aspire to receive. It's like money, amazing relationships, and solid health. Those are the top three things generally. So when it comes to the financial sector, when it comes to money, I always had I believe truly that the true currency of this world is relationships, right? It's networks, it's the people that you know. So in your experience, how have your relationships supported you towards financial abundance and financial expansion, whether it's through your intimate relationships or whether it's through generic, specific, platonic or friendship?
If someone doesn't believe in you, you won't be successful in life. Full stop. Now, that someone may have to be you as well.
Yeah.
And when we're speaking to relationships, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the people in my life. That includes my wife, that includes various friends, that includes my parents of past and present. So what I mean by past and present, I mean past versions of my parents, the ones that were really harsh and the enmeshment that my mother projected on me and the violence and the abuse that my father projected on me. I've very gratefully and thankfully come to a place where I have genuinely forgiven and felt and moved through that, right?
Yeah.
But that took many, many years. You can't just get there. It's not about thinking your way through this. So without these relationships and these dynamics, I wouldn't be where I am. Like, my wife deeply believed in me when she first met me. I share this story, maybe not often enough, but when we first met, I was very honest with her, and I was in a lot of debt, in more than multiple six figures of debt, of bad debt too. It wasn't like asset-based debt; it was credit card debt, and there were various reasons for that. And I wasn't making that much money. She was probably making anywhere from 24 to 27x what I was making, and she saw the potential in me. She saw who I was and what I was capable of, and she saw where I was coming from, and she genuinely believed in me, and that allowed me to really flourish into the world, and it gave me deep confidence as well, and it gave me a safety net, right? Like, I really had a safety net, and I had to surrender to that, and that's a whole other story, man. Like the ego battle, the internal ego battle, and all these different things. But I knew my worth and I knew my value, and I knew that it wasn't even that I needed people to believe in me. I just needed some support, right, from where I had come from. And then once I got that, I took the baton and I ran, right? I
Yeah.
remember years ago when I was in deep poverty and I didn't have money to buy food, my friend would come to my house, get in the car now, take me to the
Wow.
grocery store, buy me food, bring me back. You know, there are people in our lives, if we allow them to, and as difficult as it can be to receive in that way, if we allow them to, can give us a great gift of having faith and restoring faith in humanity and restoring faith in our own selves.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And how was that process for you, you know? Because as you've mentioned, you know, when you met your wife and for her to hold the space for your potential to flourish, how was your internal state moving through all of that, especially as what society deemed as a successful man should be, and allowing her to see you in all of you, and then, you know, growing through that? Like, how was that process for you?
It was very challenging to not be earning as much as my wife and to not be as financially abundant and secure and free as my wife was, as my now wife, as you know, my partner back then. It was very challenging and my ego had a lot to say. And
Mm,
the internal battles and the shadows I had to face from that to allow that in and to really go beyond that and to not remain stuck and not be overly proud, and allow the opportunity for that love that she had for me to penetrate me
yeah,
and for me to feel that and then to grow from that and use that as fuel as opposed to grinding and using fear as fuel as I had
yeah,
before and using, you know, self berating attitude as fuel. So I had to make some big changes. It was all part of my growth, and I was just willing to do it. And even though I was meeting it with resistance on a regular basis, it wasn't enough resistance to stop me.
beautiful. And what was the biggest thing that she did for you in through the support, would you say?
The biggest thing my wife did for me was meet me with compassion and non-judgment,
Mm,
and continuously do that and see my light and love all parts of me.
yeah.
That was very big for me, and I'd like to think, and maybe at the beginning it was a little more challenging, but I like to think that for the most part I did that with her as well.
Yeah, it's always a mirror, hey? It's always a mirror.
Yeah, it wasn't a one-way street.
Yeah, it's always a mirror. So you've got a kid, eh?
Yes,
A little boy, a little girl. How young?
little girl. She's 2. She turned 2 yesterday.
Yeah, wow. So when it comes to fatherhood, like what was that like for you? You know, the first time holding your offspring and, you know, being with your wife through that process. Like, how was that for you?
Watching my wife give birth and then holding our little girl is the most remarkable thing I've ever experienced, and the courage that emanated from my wife, and man, the whole process is just such a it is a journey, man. Like that is medicine work. You know, that is a medicine journey, and I've been in many medicine ceremonies, and that is very, very different to anything I've experienced before. And what then came after that was also very tumultuous and turbulent and beautiful
Mm,
and all the things. It was a complete identity shift for me. It brought up a lot of old stuff that I thought I had worked with fully or worked through fully. And nope, there was more there. And
the layers.
there still continues, yeah, the layers, man. There still continues to be more there, and so with every big life experience that we have, and the birth of a child is definitely one of those. A new part of ourselves is revealed in the world, and it has been a journey. It is a journey. I love that little girl so deeply. I mean, talk about unconditional love, brother. Like
Yeah.
there's an example of unconditional love. I mean, I would argue there's still conditions there, of course, but it's a kind of love I've never experienced before, a kind of
Yeah.
connection, even if you don't use the word love, a kind of connection and closeness and
Yeah.
drawn to that I've never experienced before, and a protectiveness and a just a deep care. I've just never had it before.
Yeah. And that's so beautiful, eh? That's so beautiful. Every single time I have conversations with new parents, the profoundness of the experience itself. You can really see the glow in the energetic field and in themselves through that process. So what would you say if like potentially like they're new parents and they're expecting a new kid and stuff like that, a newborn coming on their way? What advice or perhaps like from your own life experiences would you provide them, would you give them through this process?
There's nothing that you can do or be before you have a child to prepare you for having a child. Even if it's your second or third child, I would say, if not, I've only got one. Because every child brings their own unique energetic signature into the world, their own little baby human footprint, right? Footprint and imprint. So what I will say is this from my own experience, if you have the capacity to free your schedule up, to do less, especially in the first 6 to 12 months, if that's a possibility for you, if you're fortunate enough to be blessed in that way, please do that. I was fortunate enough, we are fortunate enough to be blessed in that way. But I didn't do it long enough. I did it for a couple of months, 2-3 months. And even then I was in this ego battle of identity and I wasn't as productive as I was. And I was so vested and rooted in performance-based esteem that if I wasn't performing or doing, then my self-worth was diminished and it fucked with my head. And I allowed that to impact the quality time I could have had with my child and my wife. Yes, I was present. Yes, I was there. Absolutely. I did more than most were probably able to do because I had that opportunity. But in retrospect and hindsight, I could have done it's not about doing more. I just could have been more available, more present, and I've let go of the other stuff even more. And it's not I don't want to say to regret because I really was available. Yeah. But it is a little bit of a pain point, and it's how the cards fell. But that would be the guidance I would suggest for anyone that's able to.
Yeah, beautiful presence. There's nothing like passionate presence in that moment to fully experience what's in front of you, rather than let all of those distractions or like, as you've mentioned, self-worth come into play. And that's so profound. Cool. Final question for you, Stefanos. Final question. If I give you a mic, right? And this mic, it's profound in its nature, and the moment you speak into it, every single individual on earth in this 3D realm will receive the message. What do you have to say to this mic?
Do the thing that you're unwilling to do, but that you know you need to do.
Powerful. Powerful. Such a pleasure, Stefanos. Like such an amazing conversation.
Thank you,
we really went through different discussions, topics, aspects when it comes to relationships, when it comes to parenthood in various ways as well. And it's been such an honor, such a pleasure to connect with you through this process. If, let's say, someone is curious and they want to learn more about you and they want to perhaps potentially work with you in various capacities, how can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ray, for asking. coachwithsteph.com if you want to apply for coaching and working together in a one-on-one capacity. Sifandos.com, my website, all my offerings and services and so forth are there. And any social media, your favorite social media channel at Sifandos.
Beautiful. And I'll drop Stefanos' details in the description down below. Such a pleasure, such an amazing conversation, and I look forward to whatever is to unfold between our connection in the near future.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Ray. Take care, my friend.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode and believe in our mission to create a positive impact in the world, hit that subscribe button so you never miss our epic content. If it inspired you, share on social media. Imagine the ripple effect we could create together. Don't forget to tag me using my social media handles in the description below. We have some mind-blowing episodes coming up that you won't want to miss. Together, let's create a wave of change. Stay curious, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.